All right, the seven sacraments of the papal Roman Antichrist. Seven sacraments. That's what they claim, that there are seven sacraments. Really, there are not. There are two sacraments, baptism and what they fallaciously refer to as the Eucharist. Since Eucharist means thanksgiving, this is actually the Lord's Supper, is what we call it. They call it the Eucharist falsely, and we call it the Lord's Supper. So there are really only two, but here are the seven sacraments of papal Rome. Now, what is the definition of a sacrament according to papal Rome? The Roman papal definition of a sacrament. This is the best definition I've ever heard anyone give of the papal definition of a sacrament. It was from a professor of New Testament that I had at a Roman Catholic university. And he said, definition of, at least Rome's definition of a sacrament is that it is a sensible sign that effects the change it signifies. Effects the change. So simply by doing the sacrament, notice the words effects the change. This means by simply doing the sacraments, there is an effectual change that takes place in the one partaking in them. Now, they will say that effectual change comes by the work of God's grace, but by doing the sacraments, that's how you force God to grace you, is by simply doing the sacraments. So, again, Roman papal definition of a sacrament is that it is a sensible sign, whichever one of the seven you're talking about. And of course, there are only two. A sensible sign that effects the change it signifies. This is one of the main ways the papal Antichrist has a mouth speaking great things. Daniel 7, verse 8, referring to the little horn. These great words that the horn was speaking, the little horn of Daniel chapter 7. Daniel 7, verse 11, and having a mouth that spoke great things, Daniel 7:20. These are all about the little horn, the Antichrist. These great words and a mouth speaking great things are referring to the doctrines and dogmas of the little horn, the Antichrist, papal Rome. This is one of the main ways the Antichrist made war with the saints and prevailed over them, Daniel 7:21, and was, quote, allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, Revelation 13, verse 7. So the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 and the sea beast of Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, are the same entity being spoken of in Daniel and Revelation. And of course, the revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which he gave to John to show his servants those things which must shortly come to pass. Which, of course, the little horn did not arise until after the fall of the Roman Empire, according to Daniel chapter 7. So the little horn of Daniel 7, the sea beast, are speaking of the same entity, the Roman papal system of errors, falsehoods, and lies. So remember that lies are just as much made up of propositions or assertions as the truth of God. All truth is propositional, so are all lies, errors, and falsehoods. They're both propositional. There is no knowledge without a proposition or a group of propositions. Remember, Martin Luther in The Bondage of the Will said, to not delight in assertions is not the character of the Christian mind. Nay, he must delight in assertions, or he is not a Christian at all. Assertions, doctrines, dogmas, they're all made up of propositions, words put together that mean stuff. Words put together that mean stuff. They are not gobbledygook. They are not, quote, speaking in tongues, or the false speaking in tongues that Pentecostals engage in. Martin Luther also said, nothing is more known and more general amongst Christians than assertions. In fact, here's Martin Luther's powerful words. If you take away assertions, you take away the whole of Christianity. See Martin Luther's The Bondage of the Will, Erasmus Preface reviewed. Here, let's just go to that for a second, because it is the 500th year anniversary of Martin Luther's The Bondage of the Will. At least in December of 2025, it will be the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's The Bondage of the Will. Very important. So in Erasmus Preface Reviewed, here's The Bondage of the Will, Erasmus Preface Reviewed. Just open that up, section 1. I would notice, Erasmus, your censuring me in all your former books, an obstinacy of assertion, And you say that you are so far from delighting in assertions that you would rather at once go over to the sentiments of the skeptics, if the inviolable authority of the Holy Scriptures and the decrees of the Church would permit you, to which authorities you willingly submit yourself in all things, whether you follow what they prescribe or follow it not. These are the principles that please you. And he goes on, for not to delight in assertions is not the character of the Christian mind. Nay, he must delight in assertions, or he is not a Christian. All scripture is made up of assertions, propositions, words put together that mean stuff. But why should I dwell upon this, Erasmus? Nothing is more known and more general amongst Christians than assertions. If you take away assertions, you take away Christianity. Okay? So very important stuff by Martin Luther. Martin Luther was talking about, whether he knew it or not at the time of his writing, he's talking about propositional knowledge. The basis of all Christian epistemology, and really all human epistemology, is that all knowledge is made up of assertions or propositions, words put together that mean stuff. There is no knowledge without a proposition or a group of propositions. So let's get back to, the Roman Catholic definition of a sacrament is that they are sensible signs that effect the change they signify. The Roman Catholic sacraments are that they are sensible signs that effect the change they signify. Okay? So what is the biblical definition? Biblical Protestant definition of a sacrament, baptism and the Lord's Supper. Sensible signs that are the external or outward demonstrations of the inward change that God has already wrought in the hearts, minds, wills of sinners by his grace alone. The term hearts, minds, and wills are all synonymous terms in Hebrew. It's the Hebrew word lebab or leb, and it means heart, mind, will, or inner man. Okay? So the sacraments of baptism, and this is why I'm a Credo Baptist and not a Paedo Baptist. Okay? Because the Paedo Baptist is really is a holdover from Papal Rome and their false view of the sacraments. Sensible signs that are the external or outward demonstrations of the inward change, the conversion that God has already wrought in the hearts of sinners by his grace alone. Notice how this is a denial of the false notion that simply by doing the sacraments they effect any change in the one partaking. They don't. Why these sacraments don't affect any change in anyone whatsoever? Because that's not their nature. That's not their character. The sacraments or ordinances of baptism and the Lord's Supper do not effectuate any change in the one partaking, but are simply the outward confession or profession, demonstration that God himself has already changed their hearts, minds, and wills of the ones partaking. Christians bear witness to the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ by partaking in the sacraments in faith, the faith that God himself has produced in converting sinners by his grace alone. That this salvific faith or saving faith is wrought in the hearts, minds, and wills by God's grace alone and infused into sinners by his grace alone is explicitly declared in the Synod of Dort, 1618 to 1619, under the third and fourth heads of doctrine. Article 14 reads, "Faith is therefore to be considered as the gift of God, not on account of its being offered by God to man to be accepted or rejected at his pleasure," dispelling with all synergism here, but because in reality faith, saving faith, is in reality conferred, breathed, and infused into him by God's grace alone. Nor is it because God bestows the power or ability to believe and then expects that man should, by the exercise of his own free will, consent to the terms of salvation and actually believe, that is, conjure up saving faith out of the cauldron of their own power of contrary choice, but because he who works in man both to will and to do, and indeed in all things and all, produces, God himself produces both the will to believe and the act of believing also, because he infuses by his grace, God by his grace infuses saving faith into them, into his elect. And this is what man has a huge problem with. I have free will. It's my free will that I accept or reject the gospel of Christ? No, it's by God's grace alone. So this is under the third and fourth heads of doctrine, and that third and fourth heads of doctrine deal with total depravity and irresistible grace. So they're both together. It's the Synod of Dort actually lays it out as ULTIP, ULTIP. That's the order: unconditional election, limited atonement, total depravity, and irresistible grace, and then preservation of the saints, or perseverance. And the saints, of course, only persevere because God preserves them. So perseverance of the saints is really God's preservation of his saints. So I hope that's helpful when we're thinking about the sacraments. And one of the ways the papal Roman Antichrist is filled with errors, falsehoods, and lies is the sacerdotal or sacramental system. Sensible signs that actually effect the change they signify. We say, no, they don't. God's grace alone effects the change in a sinner. And then the sinner gets baptized and then engages in the Lord's Supper because of the conversion that God brings forth in the hearts of sinners. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Short video. I didn't want to make it too long, but I think there's some substantive things to understand here. So we'll talk to you soon, Lord willing. Soli Deo Gloria.